Moscow wakes under a heavy autumn sky, the kind that casts the city in a muted grey light. The long boulevards of the capital move with their usual rhythm: early commuters, quiet government motorcades, shopkeepers pulling open metal shutters. But the political atmosphere is anything but calm. The latest round of US sanctions against Russia has drawn the attention of global markets, diplomatic channels and households across the country. And today, the Russian president has chosen to speak directly on the issue, offering his view of what these sanctions mean, not only for Russia's economy, but for its political stance in the world. At a press briefing in Moscow, President Vladimir Putin addressed the topic directly. His tone was measured, deliberate, neither dismissive nor alarmed, but clear. Speaking to the press, he said, regarding the new US sanctions, there is nothing new. Certainly, they are serious for us. There is no doubt about that. And they may have certain consequences, but they will not have a significant impact on our economic health. The statement is characteristic of Russia's messaging in recent years, acknowledging pressure, but refusing to concede vulnerability. The US sanctions in question are targeted at the Russian oil sector, the beating heart of the nation's export economy and a major source of state revenue. Oil has, for decades, been not just a commodity in Russia, but a lever of geopolitical influence and financial stability. Washington's decision to tighten restrictions is part of a broader strategy aimed at limiting Moscow's ability to fund its military and diplomatic agendas. Energy exports have historically enabled Russia to maintain fiscal stability even during global downturns. Cutting into that system is not just an economic maneuver, it is a strategic one. Yet Putin's assertion reflects a key reality. Russia spent years insulating itself from Western financial pressure, developing alternative trade routes, domestic production capabilities, and parallel banking infrastructure. After 2014 and again in 2022, Russia prepared for the possibility that sanctions would become an enduring part of its international economic landscape. So when Putin speaks of resilience, he is not merely projecting confidence, he is referencing a structural shift that has already taken place. Russia's pivot toward Asia, the strengthening of trade networks with China, India, Turkey and Gulf partners, and the growth of domestic industries all form the strategic backdrop to his response. But the president did not limit his remarks to economics. He also addressed the political dimension of these sanctions, emphasizing national dignity. He said, this is, of course, an attempt to put pressure on Russia, but no self-respecting country or people ever makes a decision in this way. And of course, Russia has the privilege of feeling and considering itself part of this list of self-respecting countries and peoples. In these words, the message is unmistakable, and Russia sees the sanctions not only as an external economic constraint, but as a symbolic attempt to shape its internal decision-making. And the Kremlin's response is equally symbolic: sovereignty, autonomy, identity. Yet beyond the rhetoric, the practical effects of sanctions do make themselves felt. Inside Russia, businesses adjust, industries recalibrate supply chains, banks reconfigure lending policies, and consumers feel shifts in prices. The government responds through subsidies, currency interventions, and budget reallocations, all aimed at maintaining stability. These adaptations do not eliminate impact, but they do determine whether the nation bends or stands firm. The Russian public has, over many years, become accustomed to narratives of external pressure, memories of past economic crises, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the financial meltdown of 1998, the global downturn of 2008, inform how citizens interpret the present. Today, many Russians see sanctions not as isolated acts of policy, but as part of a decades-long confrontation between two worldviews, one based on Western liberal internationalism and the other on sovereign, centralized state authority. For global markets, the situation is more complex. Oil prices respond to shifts in supply and geopolitical pressure. Restricting Russian oil on Western markets reconfigures flows rather than reducing them. Tankers reroute. Trading firms adapt. Energy finds new buyers. Market systems rarely halt. They redistribute. But the more interesting shift is geopolitical. Russia's partnerships with non-Western states continue to deepen, whether through energy corridors, currency exchange agreements, or infrastructure projects. Moscow and Beijing have expanded settlements in national currencies. India has become a major buyer of Russian oil, refining it and re-exporting it to European markets, a reminder of how deeply global trade systems interlock. The Middle East has become a site of negotiation, not alignment. and Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia increasingly seek multi-alignment rather than bloc politics. So when Putin suggests that Russia sees itself as part of a group of nations acting on principle rather than external pressure, he is speaking to a global landscape where alliances are shifting and where the language of sovereignty resonates with many states seeking independence from Western dominance. But there is another dimension, the domestic political messaging. Inside Russia, stability is portrayed as strength. The government emphasizes continuity, pensions paid, salaries stable, infrastructure active. Public messaging reinforces the idea that external pressure is a test of resilience and unity, not of division. This narrative has deep historical roots. The concept of the nation enduring hardship for the sake of sovereignty is one that resonates across. At the same time, the Russian leadership seeks to reassure both domestic and international business communities that the fundamentals of the economy remain sound. Investments in agriculture, aviation, heavy machinery, pharmaceuticals, and digital infrastructure are emphasized. The state presents itself as a stabilizer, a central actor in guiding the economy through globally turbulent times. For Washington, the strategy is different. Sanctions are meant to apply pressure slowly, to tighten constraints over time, creating economic friction and political strain. The idea is not immediate collapse, but gradual limitation. This is a long game, one in which perception matters as much as measurable effect. And so, two narratives move in parallel. The United States describes sanctions as leverage, a tool to signal disapproval and shape outcomes. Russia describes them as interference, a challenge to sovereignty and dignity. Each side reinforces its own internal legitimacy through its external messaging. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens in Russia, in Europe, and around the world experience the indirect consequences: higher global fuel prices, shifts in import availability, fluctuations in currency markets. The global economy is deeply interconnected. Even distant policies have local consequences. Yet the core question remains: do sanctions change strategic decision-making? History offers mixed answers. Some nations under sanctions make concessions. Others adapt and continue unchanged. The outcome depends on internal unity, resource resilience, international partnerships, and political will. In Russia's case, these factors combine in a way that makes rapid or forced policy shifts unlikely. This is where Putin's remarks carry political weight. By stating publicly that the sanctions are serious but not destabilizing, he signals both resolve and preparedness. By framing Russia as a self-respecting nation, he invokes identity and continuity, and by speaking calmly, without urgency or alarm, he seeks to shape perception. The state is steady, the leadership is firm, the nation endures. In the coming months, the practical effects of the sanctions will reveal themselves gradually, not in dramatic headlines, but in slow economic adjustments. Industries will continue to diversify supply chains. Trade routes will further expand toward Asia and the global south. Financial systems will adapt to new transaction channels. These shifts are not sudden reactions. They are part of long-term strategic reorientation. What becomes clear is that this moment is not an isolated event. It is part of a much larger transformation in how global power is structured, how nations trade, and how the world defines influence. The confrontation between Russia and the United States is not only military or diplomatic, it is economic, ideological, and symbolic. Each side claims legitimacy, each side frames the other as the initiator of pressure, and each side appeals to its own narrative of history. For Russia, that narrative is one of endurance, sovereignty, and national pride. For the United States, it is one of strategic leadership and global norms. Between them lies a world increasingly shaped by choice, not of sides, but of autonomy. And as Moscow continues its daily rhythm, the question is not whether sanctions will matter, but how nations reshape themselves in response. This chapter is still being written.